Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
They say every family has a golden child, but in ours, Emily didn't just shine. She sparkled like a damn chandelier at a tacky wedding reception. And I was always the dull bulb they forgot to screw in. It wasn't new. It had been like that since we were kids, when she got the shiny birthday parties with ponies and princess cakes, while I got a quick candle and a grocery store muffin. But I never thought my mother would go so far as to toast her, out loud, in front of the entire extended family, declaring her, without irony or shame, the child that gave me bragging rights. She said it while holding up a glass of sparkling wine, her voice all proud and smug, while everyone else laughed like it was the punchline to a great joke, their eyes darting between my sister's polished smile and my awkward silence. Everyone laughed, except me. I just sat there, my hands folded on my lap, my smile tight enough to cut glass, waiting for the moment I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times. The room was full, uncles, cousins, my mother's bridge club friends, and even old Mr. Lowell from next door, who was about as deaf as a brick, but never missed a chance to hover around when the wine was flowing. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the stuffy living room, the air thick with perfume, cologne, and the baked ham Mom insisted on cooking for every gathering, no matter the season. My sister stood in the middle of it all like she was born for the spotlight. Her hair curled just so, that soft beige cashmere sweater that made her look like a walking ad for a department store Thanksgiving sale. She laughed, of course. Oh, she laughed. Head tilted slightly back, hand on her chest, like she was surprised but not really. Like it was just another compliment to toss in the pile of medals and plaques she'd collected since she was 9. I could feel it rising in my throat then. Not anger, not jealousy, something sharper, something that had taken years to sharpen and ferment and become what it was now. Clarity. I wasn't going to cry this time. I wasn't going to swallow it and smile politely and tell myself it was just a joke or just Mom being Mom. I reached into my bag, slow and deliberate, like I was pulling out a piece of myself that I'd buried years ago. The envelope was thick, yellowed slightly at the edges, the handwriting on the front fading but still legible. My father's handwriting. The room was still laughing when I stood up. It took a second for people to notice, another second for them to go quiet. Even Emily turned, her perfect little grin freezing when she saw what was in my hand. I guess, I said, my voice louder than I expected, calm but with a sharpness I couldn't hide. If Emily is the child that gave you bragging rights, then you won't mind hearing what Dad had to say about that. Silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like everyone's breath had been snatched out of the room at once. Aunt Lynn lowered her glass. One of the cousins shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Even Mr. Lowell stopped chewing and stared, blinking like he'd misheard, but didn't dare ask again. My mother blinked once, her lips parting slightly, like a person about to speak, but forgetting what words sound like. I looked down at the envelope, then back up. This letter was written by Dad the week before he died. He never sent it. Maybe because he knew Mom wouldn't read it. Or maybe he thought one day I would need it more than he needed to say it out loud. And today seems like that day. I didn't read it yet. No, I wanted to let the silence sit there for a bit. Let it settle in their chests like a stone. Let the weight of it make them squirm a little. Because this wasn't just about one toast or one stupid sentence. This was years. This was birthdays skipped, accomplishments ignored, lies told, and truths rewritten to make one daughter a hero and the other a footnote. This was about the time my college graduation was too far to drive to, but they flew across the country to watch Emily run a damn 5K charity race. This was about the phone calls not returned, the photos taken down, the holidays spent alone. This was about how I was erased so Emily could be painted brighter. So when I finally said, "Should I read it?" I didn't ask like I needed permission. I asked like I already knew the answer. But I wanted to watch my mother's face when I asked. I wanted to see the flicker of fear there. Yes, fear, because she knew whatever was in that envelope, it didn't fit her story. And as her lips pressed together into that familiar, dismissive, tight line, the one I'd seen 1,000 times when I dared to ask for equal treatment, I knew I had her, but I didn't open the letter, not yet. Because some truths need to simmer before they boil over, and I wanted them all to feel the heat. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life, maybe a parent or a sibling, who just never seemed to see your worth? Like no matter what you did, how hard you tried, you were always one step behind the one they truly adored. What would you do if you had the proof, solid, undeniable proof, that everything they believed about the golden one was a lie? Would you show it, or would you burn it and walk away? I didn't walk away. Not this time. I looked straight at Emily and I smiled. The kind of smile that isn't warm, it's cold, clean, and knowing. And then I said, let's talk about what was really inside this envelope. And just like that, the whole room leaned in. It's strange how a lifetime of silence can feel louder than any scream, how the quiet dismissal of your presence can wound deeper than a slap, and how no matter how much time passes, the sting of being the overlooked one, of being the one who didn't sparkle, who didn't fit the family narrative, doesn't dull. It just settles into your bones like a cold you can't shake. When I think about growing up, I don't remember warmth or togetherness, not in the way people mean it when they describe childhoods filled with backyard barbecues and shared laughter under string lights. I remember watching from the hallway while Emily opened gifts that came in glossy bags with glittering tissue paper, watching from the car window as she was dropped off at ballet while I got told to figure out something on my own, watching my mother's face light up in a way I never quite managed to trigger. It wasn't abuse, not the kind you call child services for. It was the kind of slow, quiet favoritism that bleeds the air out of a room without anyone noticing the suffocation. Emily was born when I was 5, and it didn't take long before my name became a footnote in conversations that started and ended with hers. She was beautiful from the start, or so they said, with perfect blonde curls and eyes that made old ladies at church coo and fawn like she was the second coming. I was the awkward one with the lazy eye that needed a patch for 2 years and hair that refused to lie flat. And even though I eventually grew into myself, the family had already made up their minds. She was the joy, the pride, the walking photo album Mom carried in her purse, and I was the one who didn't like the spotlight, which was just another way of saying, not worth noticing. It started small, missed events, forgotten achievements, little slights you're told not to take personally. The time I won the science fair in 7th grade and got a certificate and a handshake from the mayor, but Mom couldn't make it because Emily had a piano recital. Or the Christmas when I saved up my babysitting money to buy her a silk scarf she'd been eyeing. And she thanked me without even looking up, too busy admiring the diamond earrings Emily had picked out, with Dad's credit card, of course. But the worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was being gaslit into believing I was imagining it, that it was all in my head, that I was too sensitive, that they loved us both the same. And when I pushed back, when I asked why she got so much more attention, more affection, more everything, I was told I was being jealous, ungrateful, dramatic. That's the thing about subtle favoritism. It protects itself with plausible deniability. There's always a reason, always a justification, and always a way to make you feel like the problem. But I wasn't stupid. I watched. I listened. I kept my mouth shut and my eyes open, and over the years, I started keeping things. Little things, but important. Texts, emails, notes, pictures, moments that contradicted the narrative they fed the world. And I kept them not because I had a plan, but because something inside me refused to let it all be forgotten. It wasn't bitterness. It was survival. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted someone, anyone, to one day look me in the eye and say, "You were right. We saw it too." It wasn't until Dad got sick that the cracks in the golden statue of Emily started to show. He was the only one who ever looked at me like he saw something more than just the other daughter. And even though he was quiet and often deferred to Mom, toward the end, He started speaking more freely, like he knew his time was running out and there were things he needed to say. It was during one of those long, late-night conversations, after the house had gone quiet and Emily had gone back to her perfectly curated city life, that he mentioned things he'd noticed. He didn't come out and say it. Dad never did anything so direct. But he dropped hints. Questions like, "You ever wonder why your mother always talks more about your sister's awards than your promotions?" Or, "You remember when you got into college and she made you take the bus to orientation because she had to take Emily shopping for prom?" Those were his breadcrumbs, and I followed them. The letter came a few weeks after he passed. A manila envelope, no return address, just my name in his familiar handwriting. Inside was a single-page letter, dated 1 week before he died. I read it once, then twice, then put it away, and didn't look at it again for nearly 8 years. I don't know if I was scared or if I just didn't want the final truth, because part of me, even after everything, wanted to believe maybe I had been wrong. Maybe Mom really did love us equally. Maybe Emily just shone brighter, and I couldn't accept it. But I wasn't wrong, I know that now. And when I heard her at that reunion, standing there with that smug glow, basking in the praise like it was her birthright, I realized that truth, no matter how ugly, was better than silence. That's when I reached for the letter, not out of vengeance, but because someone had to say it. Someone had to shatter the myth. I didn't keep receipts out of spite. I kept them because no one ever believed me without proof. And I had proof. Not just of who Emily really was beneath the gloss, but what my mother had done to keep her on that pedestal. I didn't need them to like me. I just needed them to listen. And for the first time in decades, I had something they couldn't laugh away. It's remarkable, really, how a single sheet of paper, thin as air and barely heavier than a sigh, can hold more weight than years of dinners eaten in silence, birthdays wrapped in obligation, and praise so one-sided it might as well have been scripted by a PR team. I had almost forgotten about the letter in the early years after Dad passed, not because it didn't matter, but because grief has a way of pushing everything else into the background like bad stage lighting, making it impossible to distinguish what's important from what's just noise. For a long time, I couldn't bear to read it again, not because I thought he had written something cruel, but because I feared he had written something true, something that, once acknowledged, I could never unknow or ignore. He mailed it to my apartment a week before he died, tucked into an envelope without a return address, no note explaining its purpose, no cover letter to frame its meaning, just that single page, folded in thirds with his signature at the bottom. His familiar block lettering in ink that had started to fade along the edges by the time I took it out again. When I first read it, I sat on the edge of my couch in a half-lit room with a mug of tea in my hands I don't even remember making. The words didn't shock me, not in the way a secret confession might. There was no grand reveal, no hidden affair, no money stashed away in an offshore account. What he gave me wasn't scandal, it was confirmation. And for someone like me, someone who had been gaslit and diminished for the better part of her life, confirmation was far more powerful than surprise. He wrote about the ways he had seen me, really seen me, through the years, even if he hadn't always stepped in. He admitted that he had stayed silent too often, that he had let my mother control the story of who we were as a family, and that he hadn't done enough to challenge the narrative she built around Emily being the star and me the background noise. He wrote that he regretted not standing up for me more, not because I was weak, but because I was strong in ways they never wanted to acknowledge. He wrote that he had started to see the cracks in Emily's perfect image, the manipulation, the quiet cruelty, the way she always knew exactly what to say to stay the favorite, and that he had come to realize how much of that was enabled, even encouraged, by my mother. But what stood out most, what made my throat close and my hands tremble as I read, was the part where he wrote that he hoped one day I would stop waiting for permission to speak the truth, that I would understand I didn't need validation from people who had spent a lifetime denying me mine. He didn't say I should expose them, or seek revenge, or try to make anyone pay. He simply said, "Your voice matters. Don't let it rot inside you." I folded the letter back up, slid it into the envelope, and tucked it into the back of my underwear drawer like a keepsake you're not ready to look at, but can't bring yourself to throw away. And there it sat for almost 8 years, through one breakup, 3 job changes, a move across the country, and every family gathering where I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. It became a kind of secret talisman, something I carried with me in spirit, even if I didn't touch it. When Emily got her promotion and Mom sent out an email blast to the entire family with the subject line, "My brilliant girl does it again," I didn't respond. When I brought a boyfriend home for Christmas and my mother spent 3 days calling him by the wrong name while fussing over Emily's fiancé like he was some visiting diplomat, I didn't explode. I just smiled, because I knew something they didn't. I had the truth, and eventually, truth finds its way into the light. What finally pushed me wasn't something grand. It was a Tuesday. I'd had a long day at work, one of those grind you into dust kind of days, and I got home to find a voicemail from Mom, chirpy and sharp all at once, saying she hoped I wouldn't forget the family reunion this year, especially since Emily had some very big news and everyone would be there to celebrate her. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask if I needed anything. Just a reminder that my role was to show up and smile while the Emily show ran another season. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I walked to my bedroom, opened the drawer, and took the letter out for the first time in years. I read it again, and this time, the words didn't sting. They settled. Like armor, like truth wrapping itself around me in a way that made me feel grounded instead of hollow. And I realized I wasn't going to just keep surviving this dynamic anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who swallowed her story for the sake of family peace. Because peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's a hostage situation. So I made a copy of the letter, sealed it in a new envelope, and packed it into my purse the night before the reunion. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it, or whether I'd read the whole thing out loud, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them pretend anymore. Not about Emily, not about Mom, not about who I was and who I had always been. He wrote it the week before he died, and Mom never knew I had it. And now she was going to hear every damn word. There is a particular silence that follows a truth bomb when it's dropped into the middle of a room built on carefully crafted myths. It's not the kind of silence you hear at funerals or after arguments. It's deeper, more brittle, like the moment before a chandelier falls, when you hear the faintest crack and you know something heavy is about to shatter. That's the silence I felt when I pulled the letter from my purse, unfolded it slowly with deliberate hands, and said, without breaking eye contact with my mother, "Dad wanted you to read this. I think it's time you finally did." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every set of eyes in that overstuffed living room, from cousins with half-full wine glasses to uncles perched on the edge of their recliners, turned toward me like I had just pulled a pin from a grenade. And Emily, poor perfect Emily, sat frozen with her champagne flute halfway to her lips, her smile crumbling at the corners like stale cake. I didn't read the entire letter aloud. I didn't need to lay every sentence bare for them to feel the weight of it. I picked the parts that mattered, the ones that held up the mirror I knew my mother had spent decades avoiding. I began with the paragraph where Dad described the difference in how we were raised, not in harsh terms, but with clarity that came from hindsight. Claire learned to survive in the quiet, to find her voice in the spaces where no one bothered to listen. Emily was given the megaphone and told she was a singer. A few people chuckled nervously, unsure whether it was meant to be poetic or cutting. My mother, however, paled. That wasn't metaphor to her. That was memory, undeniable and intimate, and she knew it. I continued with the next section, where Dad confessed that he had seen the signs long before he dared admit them, that he had watched Emily manipulate situations, crying on cue, twisting facts, charming her way out of consequences, and how instead of correcting her, my mother praised her resilience, her wit, her cleverness, as if lies told with a smile were somehow admirable. I glanced at Emily when I read that part, and though she tried to hold her composure, a red flush was creeping up her neck. She opened her mouth once as if to protest, but no words came out. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she had nothing rehearsed to say. But the part that silenced the room entirely, the moment when the temperature dropped and the wine suddenly tasted sour in every guest's mouth, was when I read Dad's direct statement about the scholarship, the one Emily had won senior year, the one that funded her first year at Stanford, the one my mother had paraded through our neighborhood like a trophy on a stick. "I never told you," the letter read, but I found out Emily forged part of her application. She used Claire's volunteer hours and combined them with her own. I didn't say anything because I thought it would ruin her future, but now I wonder whose future was really stolen. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around every polite fiction ever uttered in that house. The scandal was old, long buried by the glow of Emily's subsequent accomplishments, but the damage it had caused, her fast-tracked success, my quiet struggle through community college and night shifts, was fresh again in that moment. No one knew where to look. Aunt Lynn blinked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. One of my cousins, the one with a teenage daughter of his own, muttered something under his breath about unbelievable, but I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes locked on my mother. She didn't move, not a twitch, not a blink, just sat there, her glass on the table, her hands folded like a statue, as if willing herself to turn into stone. I waited for her to say something, to defend herself, to tell me I misunderstood, or that Dad was confused at the end. But nothing came, because she knew, she had known all along. Emily finally stood, her chair scraping back with a sound so jarring it made two people jump. She opened her mouth and began with the usual, something about how I'd always resented her, always been jealous, how this was just my sad attempt to rewrite history. But the words were hollow, brittle, and even she could hear it. The mask had cracked. The charm didn't work in a room where the truth had already been spoken out loud. So instead of defending herself, she walked out. Just turned and walked out of the house, with the stunned silence of a woman who had just realized the applause might never come again. No one followed her. The rest of the evening blurred into a strange, surreal quiet. Conversations were hushed, the kind of whispering you hear at wakes, and no one quite knew whether to comfort me or avoid me. A few offered awkward nods. Some murmured things like, "That must have taken courage," or "I always felt like something was off." But I didn't need their validation. I didn't do it for them. I did it for the girl I used to be, the one who sat on the porch during Emily's sweet 16 because there wasn't room in the limo for extras. My mother didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. She didn't raise her voice, didn't weep, didn't beg forgiveness. She just sat there, alone in the chair where she'd once toasted her golden child, staring at the spot where Emily had been standing. Maybe she was realizing, finally, that pedestals don't just elevate, they isolate. And when they crumble, they take more than just statues with them. They take the illusions, the control, the stories we've told ourselves to feel better about the choices we made. I didn't regret a single word. Not because it brought me joy to see them fall, but because it brought me peace to stop pretending. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt real. And that feeling was more intoxicating than any toast could ever be. The days after the reunion didn't come with any grand fallout, no cinematic confrontations or shouting matches, no dramatic phone calls in the middle of the night demanding explanations or apologies. Instead, what arrived was a kind of silence that felt unfamiliar. Not the old silence of being ignored or overlooked, but something colder, more calculating, like a vacuum deliberately created to keep me uncertain of what I had really done. I waited for the first message, the inevitable backlash cloaked in fake concern. Perhaps something from Mom worded as disappointment or confusion. Something passive-aggressive enough to avoid responsibility, but sharp enough to let me know the cost of breaking rank. But nothing came. Not the next morning, not the day after, not even a message from Emily, whose talent for manipulation I expected would at least yield a vague attempt to reclaim the narrative. Instead, they both vanished, like people who've seen their reflection in a broken mirror and decided they couldn't bear to look anymore. For a while, I wondered if I had miscalculated. If maybe, just maybe, I had gone too far. Because truth, as righteous as it might feel when first spoken, always leaves behind wreckage, and sometimes it's hard to tell whether what's burning is the lie or the bridge you just set on fire. I found myself staring at the phone more than I care to admit, wondering if this was the price of finally being heard. Exile. And then came the text from Aunt Lynn, just 3 words, about damn time. No context, no emojis, no platitudes, just that. It was more validating than 1,000 family therapy sessions could have been. Because if Aunt Lynn, the family's unofficial observer, the one who never picked sides but always paid attention, if she saw it and said that, it meant I hadn't imagined the whole thing. It meant that my truth had roots, and I wasn't crazy or bitter or jealous. I was just the first one brave enough to say it out loud. I started getting a few more quiet messages after that. Not public, never in the family group chat, but little side conversations from cousins and distant relatives, each cautiously dipping a toe into the now murky waters of our family dynamic. One cousin said she always thought it was strange how Emily could do no wrong, even when she clearly did. Another admitted she once overheard my mother talking about my poor choices after I took a job in another city, while gushing about how brave Emily was for following her dreams after quitting her 3rd job in a year. None of them wanted to take a stand. Most people never do, but I could feel it in their words, the shifting of weight, the quiet turning of heads. They were listening. They were recalibrating their version of the family story. Still, what surprised me most wasn't the reactions I got, but the ones I didn't. My mother didn't reach out, not to ask why I had done it, not to deny the letter's contents, not even to accuse me of ruining the gathering. And Emily, for all her flair and showmanship, disappeared like a ghost. She deleted several social media accounts, went dark online, and the engagement announcement that Mom had hinted at during the reunion never came. It was like she had retreated into the only space she knew how to control, absence. That's what happens when someone who's always been adored is finally questioned. They don't argue, they vanish, because they've never developed the muscle it takes to defend themselves honestly. And yet, the quiet wasn't completely satisfying. There was no apology, no reckoning, no moment of shared tears or mutual understanding, just the cold truth hanging between us like fog, dense and immovable. Part of me wanted closure, wanted Mom to look me in the eye and say she was wrong, that she saw me now, or that she was sorry for making me feel like a background character in my own family. But I knew better. People like her don't apologize. They rewrite, they retreat. They wait, hoping time will do what they never had the courage to. Smooth over the damage, dull the sharp edges, make everyone forget. But I didn't forget. I remembered everything. And more than that, I remembered myself. There was something deeply liberating about the aftermath. Even in its emptiness, I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone, no longer twisted myself into knots, trying to make my success palatable or my existence invisible enough to avoid disrupting Emily's spotlight. I started speaking up more at work, not in a confrontational way, but in a way that let people know I had ideas worth hearing. I reconnected with a few friends I had let slip away, because I had been too tired, too busy proving my worth to people who were never going to give it. I even started therapy, not to heal from one event, but to untangle years of internalized silence, to learn how to speak without guilt, to breathe without bracing for backlash. I didn't hear from Mom for 3 months. When she finally did call, it was on a Thursday evening while I was eating leftovers in sweatpants, halfway through a documentary about underwater volcanoes. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I almost let it go to voicemail. But then I answered, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted to hear her voice when she realized I wasn't afraid anymore. She said hello, paused, and then, in the smallest voice I've ever heard from her, said, "I've been thinking about what you said." That was it. Not an apology, not an admission, just that. A weak signal from a fortress built on denial, maybe the first crack in a long wall. I didn't reply with a thank you. I didn't rush to fix it. I simply said, "Good," and let the silence do the rest. You see, some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some don't end at all. They just change shape. They keep echoing in the spaces we used to be afraid to fill. And while I can't say I came out of this with a mended family or a happily ever after, I came out with something better, myself, unfiltered, unafraid, and unashamed. They may hate me for what I did. They may call it betrayal or drama or unnecessary. But for the first time in my life, they finally saw me. And even if they choose to look away again, that moment, the one where I stood with the letter in my hand and the truth on my tongue, will always be mine. And that, more than anything, is enough.